Right.
Okay, are you going to go again?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay, sorry. We're on part 2. Sorry, I didn't realise that Emily was going on to part 2. We've had the first half. You're going to get 2 parts to this. It might come tomorrow or later today. But we were just talking about the dangers of feeding one rat to 2 snakes in the same area is quite dangerous, isn't it? Knowing how they switch on and how competitive they are.
Yeah.
So I think that's another reason that you've got to be careful. And I think people that use cohabitation...
They took them out of at my old place, they took them out before they fed them.
Oh, I see. They fed them separately,
Yeah.
even though they lived together.
Yeah.
So it can work, but you've got to be extra careful. And there's Ben who's come up with this idea that he's got the best of both worlds. He's got VIVs and it's a rack. It's a VIV in a rack system. It's quite big, but you can open it like a drawer, but it gives them the VIV experience. I quite like that, and I think that's where I think we might start moving towards as we understand the sociology and the psychology of these snakes and the need for enrichment and the need for some sociability. We might find that in the future we might change the way in which we do things, Emily, in the hobby and in the industry even. But it'd be interesting to see where it goes. Okay, so what Ben was saying, I'll just read his comments. He said, that's a very interesting paper. I've read it myself, and this is why I get frustrated where people dismiss the ecology of ball pythons and other species. It feeds into the rack debate. It is not that racks are a terrible thing, it's just that some in the hobby justify the use of them down to some misinformed ecology rather than the goals of efficiency, cost effectiveness, maintenance and space, particularly when working with hundreds of animals. Chaz at Snakes and Adders does a great video on this also. He's pretty good. He does a pretty good on another video. So there is a big difference between the pet owner and the breeder. So I think that's a really honest expression of his views. Thank you, Ben. I mean, it takes a lot of boldness to say that, particularly when the majority of us are probably keeping small rack systems. And I'm quite happy to discuss it and change if I feel I need to. In fact, my idea has always been to have an enrichment area. So my idea of having the best of both worlds I know that these ball pythons can do well in small spaces, but I'm also acutely aware that they do forage and they need exercise and they need to get out. And I think it's potentially psychologically damaging to our snakes to leave them in a small rub for too long, is my honest opinion. Now, I still haven't done the full scientific analysis on that, and I want to have scientific proof. But I have been recommended, and Emily, you'll find this really interesting, there's a lady called Lorri Torrini. Now, there's a guy who's, I think it's Last Crusader. I want to thank Last Crusader for his views. He said, very interesting discussion, exactly where my head is right now. I've recently found a channel by a lovely lady named Lorri Torrini. She owns an animal rescue ranch and is doing some amazing work with the ball pythons there. I highly recommend her channel if you're interested in the intelligence and behaviour of these wonderful snakes. She changed the way I view them for sure. So I would say thank you very much for that, Last Crusader, because I actually went onto her channel and had a look at her videos. She's amazing, Emily. Do you want to have a little clip of what she does? Because I think this would interest you as a future veterinary nurse. Let me see if I can find it in my history, and I'll just show a clip of one of the videos I saw that I was really impressed with. Let's see if I can find the one I'm looking for. This one's called Desensitizing Snakes to Intrusive Interactions, Royals at the Ranch, 2nd of December 2021. This is her most recent video. Let's have a look at it.
They start small. Okay. A scribble on a napkin, a tiny moment of inspiration. But
there you go, Emily, if you have a look at her.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Royals at the Ranch for December 2nd, 2021. In this Thursday's episode, we're going to talk about how to desensitize our snakes to when we have to do welfare checks, make emergency moves with them, or have to handle them in similar circumstances. What does that mean, really? Well, we know from previous videos, and if you have been a follower of my channel, or if I've done any coaching with you at all, you know that ideally we want to adhere to Lima principles. That means that we want to use the least intrusive, minimally aversive methods possible when caring for our snakes and when training our snakes. or we want to adhere to Lyme, the least intrusive, most effective methods of effecting care. But what if there are emergencies, exigent circumstances, or unexpected events that arise and our snakes aren't well trained, or our snakes are asleep, it's the middle of their night when they would normally be resting, or they're in an ecdysis cycle, or maybe they're not feeling well, but something happens and we have to check their welfare, or we have to move them? What do we do then? We should be habituating our snakes to the occasional intrusion, but how do we do that? I'm going to go over that and I'm going to show you some examples.
So she goes over it and shows some examples. Now, when I read that, I thought, I'm actually doing that without realizing it. I'm actually checking every snake when I clean them. I don't just leave them in their hides. I very gently open the drawers. I gently bring on the lights. I go in and I just have a little inspection by opening up their hides and just making sure they're okay, that they're alive. And we have a responsibility to check every animal every day.
You're supposed to do a visual health check of every animal every day.
Is that what you're being taught?
Yeah.
Thank you, Emily. I should be asking you this question. Yeah, what other things are you taught to do in terms of, share your experiences, Emily.
Well, you do a visual health check just by looking at them. And then obviously if you've seen something, you do a physical health check.
Yes.
And check like what's wrong with them. And obviously if you can't, it's harder with snakes because you can't really do much yourself. You take them to a vet and they'll have a veterinary check.
Thank you, Emily. So it's really good that they're teaching these principles. So when it comes to handling, obviously it's minimum intrusion. So we don't want to be overly handling the animals because that will lead to them having stress. So it's a balance, isn't it? It's enough to give them some intrusion so that when there's a health issue, you're not going to get your head bitten off when you pick up your snake and take it to the vet. You don't want that kind of experience. So there's a balance to be had as to how much time we spend with them, and having that interaction makes it easier to treat them. So if you have to treat them in your facility, if you've got some socialization built into your snakes from hatchlings, so we tend to not interfere with our hatchlings too early, but we try to get them used to being handled quite young, so there's no massive shock later in life. So it's all about conditioning, and I think it's really important to do a degree of conditioning, because at the end of the day we've got to take these animals to the vet so they get ill, and we've got to be able to feel safe doing that. So I do think that what she's talking about is very valid, but obviously it's done the right way. So do jump on her channel. Thank you very much to Last Crusader. I've got a whole bunch of material. She's got another fantastic video about how to treat our ball pythons when there's illness. She's taken on board lots of issues. I mean, there's an awful lot of ball pythons out there that have been not given the correct husbandry, and I think a lot of you who have taken on board rescue snakes into your collections will know that. And I know Hamlin, for example, he's got 2 or 3 rescue snakes that he's nursing back to health and doing a great job, and they're back on food, they're hydrated now, they are shedding. And I think maybe there's a responsibility on us as owners and keepers and breeders to keep an eye on that situation and be willing to take 1 or 2 snakes in and contribute towards bringing those snakes back into health. Okay, so talking of Hamlin, Hamlin also commented on yesterday's video, and he said that he's been studying a similar ball python study. It's a slightly different one to the one I've been looking at, but he was saying that there was evidence from the males, smaller males, that they were foraging in trees and eating birds and other tree life mammals that use the trees as well. So thank you, Hamlin, for sharing your experiences with us and your studies. He's going to look into it in more detail. Lazy Boy, got a lovely subscriber, my 900th subscriber. Lazy Boy says, I really enjoy the content, and he said, can you create a podcast? Now, last year I bought a podcast, I did some live shows, but my technology let me down, and so we've postponed it. Now Adam, my son, who's IT engineer, he's just bought me all the upgrades, and I can't wait for him to come on, when he comes for Christmas, because he'll be upgrading all my computer systems, and I'll be able to do live podcasts with really good connectivity so that we can have a high quality conversation. And I'm getting into this, so I think that we've got to discuss issues. I think the community wants to discuss these issues and have an open and safe forum to be able to really be honest and express their views, how they're feeling, so that we can make the adjustments to help the welfare of our snakes. And the more that we have good debates, good discussions, I mean, Rob's responsible for this really, because Rob has kind of taught me so many things that I've challenged, and he's invited me into a very natural way of researching some of these issues, which I'm now very keen to do, and it's happened very naturally. But I'm a little bit of stickler for detail, so I will go into it very, very thorough, and I won't be taking any nonsense from anyone really, because if I think that people are talking a load of rubbish, I will actually lovingly tell them that, or I won't agree with it. I'll try and do it diplomatically, but if I think that they've got a really solid source and foundation, and this is what Rob was saying, is check the source of the material that we're checking, that it is reliable. And he was saying that it's really important that when we validate the source of our material, and we find out the reason why that study was done in the first place and how it's being interpreted and applied. Because I've studied over the years, particularly on a religious and political basis, that people have what they call writer bias, so they see things the way they do. And we, as breeders and keepers, we're guilty of that. You know, we justify, as Ben was saying, why we actually use the rub system. And it may well be that it's more, although it will be beneficial to our snakes, I believe there's a commercial reason that we do it as well. And I believe there are other factors. And I think sometimes we say things to feel comfortable with what we're doing, to justify what we're doing. It may not necessarily be the optimum answer for our snakes. So I think we've got to be willing to adjust and change and incur the additional expense and cost to bring that enrichment to our animals. Okay, so let's now look at, let's just have a wee look, just bear with me here. Sorry Emily, I know it's really hot in here, the humidity is really going up, isn't it? Poor Emily. Looking forward to getting it out of here.
I've left Juro with Jared, so...
Oh, have you? Okay. Yeah. So I think that really covers the bulk of the feedback. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope I haven't missed anyone else. Oh, I have actually. Eden Morphs. I've got to bring this in, Emily, because you're going to like this one. Eden Morphs does maternity incubations. Do you know what a maternity incubation is?
I can guess, but you can say.
Yeah, well, give me your guess, Emily. Tell me what your thoughts are on that.
I don't know, something to do with checking like their pregnancy or whatever.
So you know we lift the girl off the eggs, don't we? And we put the eggs into the incubator. So he's not doing that, he's going completely natural. He's leaving the female to sit on the eggs for another 2 months. So the girl's gone off food for 2 months before she's given us the eggs. Then she'll go off for another 2 months, so you won't eat during that period. That makes 4 months of not eating, and you can see by looking at Jade that she can lose a lot of body weight in 5 months, and that's what they sacrifice. But they can rebuild and they can recover. But he mentioned something on the sociability of snakes, because Rob was saying that there isn't a bond really between the female and the hatchlings, and I disagree with him on that one, because I think that there is a bond. Otherwise, why would they be sitting on eggs for 2 months in the first place? And if they're going to sit on eggs, and that, you know, so I think what Eden Morphs was saying is that in his experience with maternal incubation, when the babies come out, they stay within the nest, they stay within the setup of the female for protection. They don't just wander off and go and eat. Now obviously in a rub situation it's probably more likely that they will stay safe, but when he goes in there to check them, how defensive do you think that female is?
Very.
Incredibly defensive. I've never seen one before, but what he's telling me is that you get your head bitten off. In fact, we know that from when we lift eggs. I mean, a female is incredibly protective of her. Remember, she's put everything into those eggs. The bond is very strong. So there is a social connection there, which this is why I'm really wanting to look at the sociability of these snakes. And that leads us on to further discussions as to how much sociability do you think is in the reptiles. I mean, the snakes themselves, I mean, yes, they are more solitary, predatory animals as they get going, but in the early stages, I just wonder how much sociability there is. And I haven't seen, it was interesting to get Eden Morph's views on this. And if anyone else has done maternal incubation and wants to share their experience with us, please feel free to drop a comment. But thank you very much for that. So, how much time have we got, Emily?
It's gone 40 minutes.
Good. So the last point we're going to discuss really is the variety of food. So if we accept that a ball python eats a variety of food, should we be giving them a variety for their nutritional reasons? Should we be giving them Norwegian rats that aren't part of their natural diet, which most of us do? Should we be giving them African furred rats so that their diet is matched to what they would normally be eating in Africa? That's why they're so popular, I think, because they're high protein, low fat, And I think this is the reason why our snakes get stressed out, is we give them fatty foods that they're not used to in the wild. Their metabolism of their evolutionary process of eating natural foods, and we give them artificial setups with Norwegian rat because it's available and cheaper for us to feed. Is that ethically correct to do that, or should we be given the very best that we can afford? And there's some issues here that we really need to look at. Should we be also giving them bird prey items so they get the nutrients and the balance of their diet from that? Or is the rat going to give them everything they need? So I'm not sure about nutritional deficiencies. So there's some things. If they go and forage, they're getting exercise and they're having the joy of the hunt. And they're using what they're designed to do, which is go and forage for themselves. Okay, so that begs the question, do we need to provide enrichment for snakes that are in captivity? And I would say yes, personally. What are your views on that, Emily? Do you think we should give our snakes enrichment?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so my idea of how I can do this is, I like, and this is why I was drawn to Bob at the Green Room channel. He provides enrichment for all his snakes in different degrees, some want more enrichment than others, and he adjusts according to their needs. But you'll see, if you look at his videos, go check him out, he's built a safe snake ladder with platforms for them to rest, that he supervises them when they're actually on there. He also has, I talked about the hexagon with all the holes in for the little hatchlings to go in and out. He has one of those, and he also allows his snakes to free roam his home while he's there. They spend hours under the settee. They spend hours in his front living room under his supervision, and they all sleep on his lap for quite a long time. And I just like his approach. He bucks the trend amongst keepers and breeders by actually showing us that enrichment's a good thing, and I like that, because in my heart I feel that I want to enrich my snakes more. And when I see someone like that, and I see someone like Lorri who's teaching us to look at the psychological side of our snakes, not just the physical, it makes me want to dig deeper and find out more about how we can do that. Okay, so I think that is going to do the food side. So the next thing I wanted to do was talk about UV lights, Emily. Did they have a UV light on the Viv on your first college that you weren't impressed with?
Yeah.
Was it changed regularly, or was it? Or do you know the history on that? What was going on there?
I know that they left it on too long because you're not supposed to keep it so it's like what it would be in their natural environment. So you're supposed to turn it off when there's like going to be in a hole or something.
Yeah. So your overall feeling was that when you were there to be taught how to do good husbandry, now it may be that this is the COVID-19 impact, that there isn't the staff availability, maybe there's some issues, and we mustn't judge the college, but you were just so disappointed when you came back and said, I want to change my college because I can't. You were there to learn how to care, and they weren't caring for those ball pythons. In fact, you came and said, Dad, you care for the ball pythons so much better than what we are, and we're supposed to be learning how to do it correctly. So I find that really sad, but I'm so pleased that you had the new opportunity to move college. But I've got an article by Frances Cosseri, and she talks about UV light in here. And I think it's either he or she, I'm not sure if it's a boy or girl, but I'm just going to show you something just to throw out there in the community, because there's a big debate. Do our snakes need UV light? And what's your thoughts on that, Emily?
I think it's up to the owner, but it is something that people are encouraged to get for them. Snakes, I mean, it's more things like bearded dragons really need UV light because they they can get metabolic bone disease from not having enough calcium, and that's why they need supplements and stuff.
Yeah. Thank you, Emily. So it sounds as though you're really learning a lot about the need for that. Now, I've been told in the industry that we don't need to put UV lights for our ball pythons because they believe that all their calcium comes from the rats they're eating.
Yeah.
And as long as the rats have got a good diet, and as long as they're eating well, they get all the nutrients and calcium from the rat. But I want to just question that for a second and say, is that enough? Because in this article, this particular person talks about that the UV light isn't just about calcium. It's got other purposes beneficial to our snakes. It's not just about calcium. And I'm just going to share some of her or his observations.
Or they.
Or they. So she explained there is still no clear evidence that royal pythons cannot synthesize vitamin D under UVB. In fact, I think it's very unlikely indeed that they do not. Every other reptile so far investigated has been shown to have this ability. Almost all vertebrates have the ability in its evolutionary conserved from very primitive life forms, since it's a very simple biological process with enormous importance in calcium metabolism, which you mentioned. Corn snakes definitely do, the only other snake in which it has been investigated. And the study in that case was properly controlled in a research laboratory, not done on privately owned animals in 2 different collections. So she's citing that when they did the original tests from 2 collectors, that she was questioning the validity of that because they were from 2 collectors that were already pumping their snakes full of rats that already had all of the UVB, all the calcium that they need, all the for their metabolic rate. So she was questioning the validity of that and saying that royal pythons may not have a particularly high requirement for UVB because they are primarily active at night. However, they have been observed basking in sunlight at the entrance to their burrows in the wild, and owners supplying full spectrum lightings also frequently report daytime basking behaviour. Thus UVB is freely available to them, and most animals utilise free resources whenever they are on offer. Of course, it is also possible that ball pythons do not synthesise vitamin D3 from UVB, but obtain all they need from their diet. Very high serum 25 OHD3 in the experimental group initially, before they had ever experienced UVB, clearly indicates that dietary supplementation with D3 works in this species. It is also possible that these high serum levels inhibit formation and absorption of more D3 under the influence of UVB. And it goes on, there's some technical terms here which I don't really understand, but I try and keep it simple because I don't want to baffle everyone with science. Are you getting baffled by science, Emily?
No, I've understood it so far.
Do you understand it? I'm getting baffled. I bet some of our viewers might be getting baffled by all these terms.
Just slow near the battery's running low.
How much have we got left?
I don't know, it's just flashing.
Okay. Well, it looks as though we're going to have to just sum up and see. So anyway, I'll just sum up what she's saying. She says that there's some other purposes for having UV light besides the calcium. So we have a species of snake that can see well into the UV spectrum and has well developed large eyes with adaptations to block out excessive UV. These are not the traits of a nocturnal fossorial animal that never experiences light. We know that UV stimulates everything from basking behaviour to reproductive activity in reptiles. At night it affects the serotonin production, and thus the presence of absence of light affects production of different hormones. In other words, UV light has significant effects on snake behaviour and is an important stimulus for them, even if we ignore the role of D3 production, which is the most often touted positive effect on reptiles by reptile keepers. Obviously we can supplement it. So she's explaining other reasons to have UV light. So I'm going to explore it a bit more. Let me know your views on UV light, whether you think it's worth considering, whether you think the ball pythons need it, and whether you think maybe moving to a VIV system would be better for them or not. Thank you, Emily, for your time. Thank you very much for this 2-part series, and we shall